This is a Marble 97 Eco Tireflator. I had this for about 12 years. I use it a couple of times a month. Recently I was filling a tire and it was working well, and then suddenly it just stopped working, and it was really weird because what I did is I checked and I knew that my air supply going in was all fine. It wasn't an air supply in issue. It was something else going on. So then I ended up I ended up making sure that I grabbed the end of the hose, and there was absolutely no air pressure here. So I ended up actually disconnecting it here and verifying that there was no air pressure. So there was no air pressure on the delivery side. I knew there was air going in, no air pressure going out. So this is what I ended up doing. So I took the unit off the wall, pulled the back cover off, and I'm doing some troubleshooting. The service manual discussed your air supply, making sure your air supply is clean and dry and coming in, and it's all that. And I know my air supply side was fine. It also talked about your hose lockout lever, that little thing in the front that comes down and locks, and what it does is it pushes this lever against this, I'd call it a cam, but against that, and then that's what kind of prevents the unit from running if there's some weight on the lever. And I knew that whole unit's all fine. And even here there's probably about 1/8 of an inch gap, so I know that this thing isn't pressing against it when it shouldn't. So I eliminated that. So it came to a point that I ended up saying, okay, I need to take a look at this unit and see if I can figure out what's wrong with it. So, like I said, took the back cover off. This I've already loosened the screws, and this is a bracket that's used to hold your back cover on. Here's where the 2 screws for the back cover go in. And so to take this off, I wanted to kind of just check this mechanism here, because this is kind of the mechanism that is used to inject the air down the hose and into the tire. So first thing I need to do is I need to get the hose lockout out of the way. And there's a spring. I'm just going to kind of pull that spring back and have it lay down. Different pair of pliers. And I'm just going to let it fall back, and it'll go back inside. There's a mounting point back towards the front of the frame that it clips to. Next thing, I'm going to take this apart, and there's just a lock ring here, or a C-clip. There's your C-clip, tiny little thing. And that came that. Now you should be able to push this out. Just like this. I've seen people where they have to use a punch to help tap it, but mine's loose enough that it came out. You could take this little thing off if you want, because it's just held in, it kind of sits between a spring and a bolt, so you can, for adjustment. That's what this nut down here is for. But I'm just going to leave it because I don't need it out of the way. It's for what I'm doing, it'll be fine. So I'm just going to leave it there. So I've got the hose lockout disconnected. Now I am going to take this unit off. There's a little C-clip, which I just dropped. I'll find it. Yeah, I dropped it. It's great. And a washer. And so after that, you should be able to take this, I have no idea, this bar off. And you pull the bar towards you, and it slips over top of this little notch here, and it just kind of comes right off. And there's that bar. So, one of the other things when I was doing the issues, when I was talking about the issues, one of the things was saying there's kind of a little screen and filter in here, and if you're getting moisture and crud coming in from your air supply, it'll actually clog this thing. This is I believe it was an 11/16, and you can actually, might be really tight. You pop it loose, come it out, and you can kind of look at it. There's a little port and there's a filter. I had mine apart, and I knew that was not the issue with mine, so I put it all back together, and everything was fine on that side. So I knew that it wasn't a clogged air supply in any way. And so that's why I kind of was taking it apart the way I was. So now I've got that top piece off, and now I want to take this thing, they call it a valve cam, I think is what they call it. And what it is there's a pin on the other side of this that goes into the black plunger, which I'll show you momentarily, and that black plunger is what activates the valve to actually let air shoot through the unit and out the hose. So I'm going to pull this little thing off again. It's another C-clip. There it is. And there's a washer as well. And then the unit just kind of slides right off. So this is the point that I got to. When I started working on this, as soon as I pulled this thing off, I verified that the little plunger here, this little plunger is what activates the valve and lets the air run from the supply side to the delivery side. So I could see that this was working fine. It was just something for some reason wasn't activating it. What I found was I started to look at this thing. As soon as I pulled it off, I realized it was flat right across here. Then looking at it, I could see this thing being made out of plastic. I realized that there was a shaft that was on here that had snapped off. And that little snapped off shaft is what fit into the hole of your little activator for the power valve. So that's, I realized, I said, okay, I saw that and I went, okay, now what am I going to do to fix this thing? So all I did is I got a file and I filed off this surface so it was level. I then got myself a 1/8 of an inch drill bit with a brad point, so that has the little point on the tip, just to make it a little bit easier so you can get it centered. And I use that to get it centered. I kind of centered it with my hand. I kind of got it started, and then I went and got a drill and I drilled it down probably at least down to here. I tried to drill it at least the whole piece of that extra piece of plastic that's sticking up, plus I tried to maybe go a little bit into the main base. So that's what I ended up doing, is I ended up doing that. Then what I did is I thought, well, what am I going to do for a pin? So my next thing that I did is I went and got myself a deck screw. I took the deck screw and I cut it off. I used an angle grinder and I cut it off so I had maybe 3 threads left. 3 threads, maybe 2 threads, somewhere in there. So I cut that off, and then I used the top and I was able to thread it in. So I threaded it in. Once it was threaded in, I figured how long I needed. I figured I needed about 1/4 of an inch for a length, and then I ended up using my angle grinder and cutting off the top to leave the 1/4 of an inch length gap. So then after that, I put her back together. So I thought, okay, fine, let's give that a shot. I know when I put this thing back on, it falls into the slot really nicely. I can see that it's pushing the power valve. I'm thinking, looks like it's going to be pretty good. So what I did is I put it back together. So to put it back together is exactly the opposite of what you just did. So you're going to put this thing back on, put your washer back on, put your C-clip back on. So that's the power valve. We're going to go with this. There was this spacer and washer. Those are already on there, so we're good. I'm going to slide that out of the way. I'm going to hook that. I'm going to pull it up, get it on my pin, and get it to come down. And so it slides. The end of this valve cam slides into the slot on that arm. I have another washer, and I have to find my C-clip because I know I dropped it. So give me a minute. Okay, I'm going to continue with the assembly. I found my C-clip, and I found the washer, so I got to put my washer back on. C-clip back on. There we go. So this assembly is all back together. Next thing is to put your hose lock back on, and that's using the pin. There it goes. Right through. Make sure that was on there. And my clips are back on. So the only thing that's left, that works fine. It's all looking good. The only thing left is to see if I can get the spring to attach. Sometimes this goes well, sometimes it doesn't. In my case, it just fell off. So you have to reach in and find the pin that it goes on to. So I got the spring back on. I'm just going to kind of move you here a little bit so you can kind of get a better view of it. So the spring goes above one of the hoses. Spring goes above this hose. You can see the spring right here. It goes above this hose. That's the whole trick that you got to do with that. So now the machine's back together. So my next thing, I'm going to give it a test. So the unit's all back together. I've connected my hose line. I reconnected the hose. I'm going to give her a go. Make sure it goes bang and click. So I'm just using a screwdriver to push the nozzle. Looks like it's working. So a little fix with the drywall, with the deck screw seems to be working really well. And I can also see that when I put my handle down, there's clearance here to block this, block the valve cam from connecting, and so I know that the hose releases in the right place. It's all good to go. So now my next step is I'm going to put it back together. I'll start by putting this bracket back on. Then there's the strip of weather strip that goes right along the very top, along the top frame. And then I'll put the back on and call it a day. So we're all good to go.